Hello and welcome to my channel. Open case. Today we have the case of Sarah Payne, which happens already 20 years ago. It is a solved case. The girl was Sarah Payne, born on October 13, 1991. She was then living with her parents Michael and Sarah Payne, her two older brothers, aged 13 and 11, and her younger sister aged 6. At that time their home was located in Hersham, England, a few hours from the home of her paternal grandparents, which is where this story takes place. There is not much more to say about Sarah, as she was only 8 years old when all this happened, so beyond her family ties, we don't have much more to say. The 1st of July 2000 was a completely normal day. To a certain extent, the girls went to work with their mother, and when they returned in the afternoon, they all started to pack their bags to go on a trip to their grandparents' house. Sarah's mother worked in a bar during the day and the father worked at night. In the morning Sarah would take her daughters and take them with her to work, and when they arrived in the afternoon, the father was already awake, so they all had a moment together. The 1st of July 2000 was a completely normal day. To a certain extent, the girls went to work with their mother, and when they came back in the afternoon, they all started to pack their bags to go on a trip to their grandparents' house. The grandparents' house was a very nice place on the coast in Kingston Gorse. The place was quite quiet, had a huge space to play, had no traffic. In general, it seemed like the perfect place to spend a vacation with the kids. It looked very safe. Unfortunately, it was not. That day, the 1st of July, after lunch, the family decided that the best thing they could do would be to go for a walk to the beach, take a few laps, talk, have a nice day. After a while of walking, the grandfather suggested going to visit the town. Of course, the two older children wanted to walk alone. They wanted more to visit things by themselves, but they had to accompany their two sisters, since they were responsible for their small group, and although they usually took care of their sisters the best they could, in this opportunity something very unfortunate happened. The adults then decided to go chat for a while at a bar in town, while the children went off to play on their own. Recall that this group consisted of the older brothers of 13 and 11 years, Charlotte, the youngest, and Sarah, who was the victim of this situation. The children, then in the afternoon, were playing in a cornfield, until suddenly, Sarah decides it would be better to return home. This happens at 2000 hours p.m. She sets out on the road to the grandparents' house, which was a few meters away, and never arrives. The parents arrived at the house. They realized that Sarah was not there. The siblings said that she had left, that they did not know where she could be, that she had wanted to return, and then the family called the police. The officers arrived almost instantly, as it was the case of an 8-year-old girl. And what does this mean? At least that is the first theory they have. Unfortunately, the family already suspected that something bad had happened. That night, unfortunately, they did not find her. However, on July 2nd, the next day, the definitive search begins, along with the investigation. 48 hours after not finding her anywhere, the family gave interviews, talked to the media to find her, and gave a picture of her. Just as there were few vehicles and few houses, there were also very few witnesses. The only thing that could be done on a large scale was to put Sarah's face everywhere and make her known on television so that people could identify her. They also tried to appeal to the empathy of the public. They tried to see if the person who had her captive returned her, but it was not so. The girl's mother, Sarah Payne, was the other main face of the case. She never allowed anyone to forget her daughter, but the family's efforts did not prevent the person who took her from killing her. On July 17th of that year, 24 kilometers away from Kingston Gorse, where she disappeared, her body was found in a field, and it is then, that July 17th, that the investigation for the murder of Sarah Payne begins. According to what Sarah's brothers said, once the police began to question them, they did not take their eyes off their sister until the moment in which she disappeared. It was an instant, it was seconds, that changed the life of all these people forever. One of the brothers was following her because Sarah had already communicated that she wanted to leave. He had planned to accompany her. He was not going to leave her alone, but his younger sister Charlotte, just at that moment, gets hurt, falls, and gets a scratch. So the older brother who was accompanying Sarah turns around 1 second, and suddenly, Sarah disappears. Something happened in the middle, while the brothers did not see, and it was so fast that they could not stop it, which means that the person who took Sarah had it planned, that he had been following them for some time and probably had a car to leave. So they asked the brothers if they had seen anything out of place or any remarkable detail. The brother following Sarah said that he saw 2 cars at that time on the road passing by the cornfield. One of them was a normal car and the other was a white pickup truck. The curious thing about this van was that inside there was a man looking towards them and smiling, and after smiling at this guy, he drove the car fast away from the scene. This point was very important, more than anything else, to rule out some suspects, and that is when we started to see the persons of interest, who the police focused on to look for suspects, well, on the list of child molesters that were nearby. Among the persons of interest there were several sexual abusers. One of the ones that most interested the police from the beginning was a man named Roy Whiting, a pedophile who lived only 5 miles from Sarah's grandparents' house, had previously owned a white van and had been imprisoned for abusing another minor. Speaking a bit about Roy Whiting, he didn't have a very good childhood. He had too many siblings and parents who didn't really care about his life. In addition, during his youth he had a very bad time at school. Beyond that, he had an adulthood that to anyone's eyes would seem very normal. After his adolescence he got a job as a mechanic, had a girlfriend, lived in his hometown, alone, but he was very well off. However, he had a little secret. He had begun to develop a taste for little girls, so much so that it became an addiction for him, to go looking for them, to wait for them. Roy Whiting, he was a pedophile, had started looking for his victims in a white van he bought for just that purpose. In 1995 he finally got what he wanted and kidnapped a girl, abused her and later got rid of his truck so as not to raise too much suspicion. Beyond that, the police managed to get the van and thus also get the culprit of the abuse, Roy, but of course, as he had not killed her, he was not given too much jail time. He had been given in principle 4 years, of which he served 2. Worse, during one of his first diagnoses, it was said that he would not do this again, that it was a one-time thing, and that besides, he was not a pedophile, which in itself is quite ridiculous for several reasons. We don't know who did this first analysis, but all in all it can be considered as a great negligence, because of what happens afterwards. Since no, this was not a single time, he came preparing him, give a diagnosis, as is ignoring the fact that he bought a van with just that sole purpose, chasing girls. He served only then 2 of those 4 years, although it must be said that he was reanalyzed and concluded quite the opposite to the first time. He would do it again, that he was a pedophile and therefore was dangerous. Equally they let him out and he remained in the records of sexual abusers. Roy Whiting was questioned for the first time about Sarah's disappearance, which had taken place 5 miles from his home about 24 hours after the disappearance. I mean, they already had him in their sights from that point on. The first time they arrived at this man's house, he was not there. They waited 5 hours for him. He arrived and they were finally able to ask him where he was all that time. As all of this was mostly routine, he was not immediately blamed. However, a while after the police left, Whiting decided to leave his house and go to his truck, and before he could leave, the police stopped him because they had been waiting for him. Normally a person who runs away from home after the police arrive is a bit suspicious, so they stopped him and arrested him. Roy Whiting spent 2 days in custody, but as there was no evidence of what he did, they did not release him on bail. The police, however, found among his belongings a fuel receipt from the garage buck barn on Highway 24, not far from Cullum, place where a shoe of Sarah Payne was found. This ticket, on top, contradicted the alibi Whiting had given, as he said he had been at that time in an amusement park in Hove at 5:30 p.m. According to him, after that he returned to his apartment at 21:30 in the evening, time in which Sarah had already disappeared. The ticket proved that he was not at home, but was in a completely different place and with his van. On July 20th is when this shoe is recovered from Sarah, and on July 23rd Roy arrives to steal a Vauxhall Nova, which is this car that you see here, which leads him to be chased by the police before hitting another car that was parked, making him to be arrested again. Whiting fue entonces arrestado bajo la acusación de conducir peligrosamente, quedó bajo custodia hasta el 27 de septiembre del 2000, cuando admitió haber tomado este automóvil y conducir peligrosamente, lo que lo condujo a ser encarcelado durante 22 meses, cosa que resultó beneficiosa para el caso de Sarah. Una vez en la cárcel, cumpliendo condena por el robo del automóvil, la policía por fin pudo hacer pruebas forenses en la furgoneta Fiat Ducato, que había comprado el 23 de junio del 2000 y es por todo esto que, el 6 de febrero del 2001, tras una amplia investigación policial, Whiting fue acusado por el secuestro y el asesinato de Sarah Payne. Según la policía de Sussex, el juicio había comenzado con varias pruebas, indicando que él había cometido el asesinato. Whiting, sin embargo, se declaró inocente desde el principio de ambos cargos y fue detenido bajo custodia hasta el inicio de su juicio, el 14 de noviembre del 2001. De hecho, como todavía estaba cumpliendo tiempo de cárcel por el robo del auto, en el momento en el cual tenía que ser liberado, siguió en la cárcel. Solamente porque estaba por esperar el juicio, lo cual probablemente haya impedido que escapes, que hices lo mismo otra vez y por lo tanto impidió que tuviera otras victimas. Finally, on November 14, the trial was held and the key witnesses included Payne's older brother, who had seen a disheveled man with yellow teeth pass by. However, the final decision was delayed a bit, because when he had to identify the assailant, the person he had seen at that time at an identity parade, he did not do so. He pointed to another person. The shoe that had been found was one of the major keys to this case, because when it came to forensic testing it showed that in it. In addition, a lock of blonde hair was also found inside the van. The in test with this lock of hair indicated that there was a 1 in a billion chance that it belonged to someone other than Sarah, which meant in short, that the lock was Sarah's. On December 12, 2001, after a 4-week trial, Whiting was convicted of the kidnapping and murder of Sarah Payne and was sentenced to life imprisonment. The trial judge indicated that this was a rare case in which a life sentence could mean life imprisonment. During the trial, they were quite careful not to reveal this person's past, as he had been in jail for something similar before, and if this gets out in the media, Royd could appeal that they were judging him based on previous cases on previous conduct rather than the evidence, but because they were so careful about it, it didn't get out and so it couldn't be appealed, and at this point then they started talking about public access to the sex offenders list, just for the safety of the community. The fact that a list like that is public makes it much easier to be careful about certain people, is a great preventative measure and is something that would eventually be resolved. Years later, on November 24, 2002, the Home Secretary ordered Roy Whiting to serve a minimum of 50 years in prison, which made him ineligible for parole until 2051, meaning he would have to live to be at least 92 years old to even ask to be released. However, as the years went by, Whiting tried to get out earlier. First, he appealed in 2004 to have his sentence reduced, and in 2010 it was changed from 50 years to 10, which was happening mostly because there were several complaints about how much time they could spend in prison. What was the human limit to put beyond that? After much discussion, it was concluded that she would spend 40 years in prison, not 10, not 50. Obviously, Sarah's family was very disappointed by all this. It is good that she would be out at 82 anyway, or at least have the possibility to ask to be released at 82, but still the change of sentence was quite unfair to the family, even more so, when it is possible that she will still have victims once she gets out. But leaving that aside, there is one good thing that came out of all this, and that is Sarah's law. There was a campaign all this time, in which they wanted the government to allow controlled access to the sex offender registry, so parents of young children could know who was around their children and who not to let around them or where to be more careful. Sarah Payne's mother always insisted that this law could have saved her daughter. So in 2008 the relevant tests were started to be able to bring this to light, so in 2010 it was revealed that the tests had been successful and the Child Sex Offender Disclosure Scheme would be extended to cover the whole of England and Wales in the spring of 2011, so it is something that ultimately this case managed to be able to save other lives with this new approach. On their side, Sarah's parents received a compensation of £11,000, which was taken by Sarah's mother as a perverse joke despite being what the law could do, that is, it is the maximum that could be given to them as compensation at that time, and despite the fact that beyond everything, it seems that things went well, or at least something could be done from this tragedy, such as the law that we discussed before, Sarah's parents did not have a good time at all. In this video it may have seemed that they were brave, that they had tried to solve things beyond all the pain, that the family was united, but it does not mean that all this did not happen with much pain. Sarah's father did not cope well with his loss. Michael Payne, at 45 years old, was discovered in his home on a Monday night. The police could not discover any culprit, as there was no post that Michael that night had decided to take his own life and probably end all that pain he was suffering. His daughter Charlotte posted a picture of her father on Facebook, along with a message that said she was heartbroken and that no matter what happened and how many mistakes we all made, you will always be my dad. Then she also added, "I'm sorry, I couldn't save you, Dad. I hope you have finally found your peace and happiness." Moving on a bit regarding what happened after the trial and everything else, on August 4, 2002, Whiting was attacked with a knife by another prisoner while fetching hot water at Wakefield Prison. Convicted murderer Ricky Tregaskis was found guilty of performing the cut that left Whiting with a 6-inch scar on his right cheek, receiving 6 years added to his sentence for attacking him. In 2011, Whiting was again attacked in prison, this time being stabbed in the eye. However, at that time he did not press any charges, and consequently, the person who did it was not brought to justice. He was again attacked a few years ago, when he was stabbed by 2 prisoners in Wakefield and was taken to hospital for treatment. However, his condition was stable, so he was again taken to prison. It is seen that several people are against him and they are clearly still attacking his person. The person behind this was imprisoned, so the case was solved. This unpleasant person was brought to justice, and at least the family has the victim's body with them, which is something that many of these cases do not usually happen. It is the least that can be done for these families, that at least they have the resolution of what happened, that they know exactly what happened, and that they have their loved one to render a funeral to remember him, to know at least where he is, something that usually does not happen, and it is very unfortunate. Thanks to all of you for supporting me through these means. I appreciate it very much, and thanks to all of you who watch my channel. Let me know in the comments your opinion about the story, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more cases.